This is National Suicide Prevention Week, and every day approximately 130 Americans take their own lives. This according to the World Health Organization.
Well, this week it's a time to share valuable and life-saving resources. So here this morning is Dr. Lokesh Shahani, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Chief Medical Officer of the UTHealth Houston Behavioral Sciences Campus. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. My pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
So suicide rose to the 11th leading cause of death in 2021, and now new data is showing that it continues to increase. Why do you think these rates just keep rising?
So unfortunately, from the projected data we have, apparently in 2022 it was at the highest peak with regards to the suicide rate in the past 20 years. Unfortunately, I think suicide is the most serious complication of mental health condition, and what we've seen with the pandemic over the past 3 years is there's a significant, almost a 30% rise in the mental health prevalence in our community, and I think that's kind of corresponding to a rise in suicidality in among our community too.
We heard a story just last hour, and it was with a woman who'd been married for more than 30 years. She had no idea her husband was depressed and he took his own life.
I'm sorry.
So obviously in that situation there were no signs and there were no warning signs or symptoms. But what are some typical ones that really might raise a red flag that we take more time with that person and try to help them?
No, that's a great question. You know, unfortunately this couple couldn't identify those warning signs, but for most people there are some warning signs which start happening, and I think the typical warning signs are changes in someone's behavior. So, you know, excessive sadness, crying a lot, not enjoying activities or hobbies that you previously liked, changes in like appetite, sleep, feeling too tired are the typical signs an adults probably sees. When it comes to children, they might be a little different because, you know, children are not able to express themselves appropriately. So, you know, changes in their behavior where anger becomes an issue, a new onset of like substance use or alcohol use becomes an issue, changes in school performance or work performance for adults. I think those become typical signs for a mental health condition.
Yeah, well, we know this can impact anyone, even people who seem to be happy. So talk about smiling depression and why that's becoming more common these days.
So what I tell people is, you know, depression or any mental health condition is a very complex disease. I say that there's a biological cause associated with the disease, which means there's a neurochemical imbalance in your brain that's impacting your brain. There's a psychological cause, so people who are dealing with grief or trauma probably are at a higher risk of developing depression. And then there are social factors such as, you know, unemployment, financial stress, marital stress, all of that kind of combined become a big complex disease known as depression. You know, a lot of people are good at hiding their pain, and sometimes that isn't recognized. You know, we've lost some great comedians to suicidality. No one could have guessed it, but you know, again, internally they were struggling and led to this suicide attempt. So social connection is really important. I think what the pandemic has shown us is once our social connection went down, mental health conditions really increased. So, you know, keeping in touch with people, checking in on people, and sometimes if you feel someone's depressed, even checking in if they are suicidal. Research has shown that if you check in on people, check if they're suicidal, that actually leads to a decrease in suicidality because people open up more and then seek more care.
Yeah, but I think sometimes people are afraid to say that word and they don't want to say, but if you ask someone if they're feeling that does open that conversation. You talked about some ways to help people. I think it's so important for people to realize there's a big difference between depression and someone being sad. So you can't just say, oh, cheer up, it's okay. It doesn't work with depression. In fact, sometimes that makes it worse, and usually does.
So, you know, sadness is a normal human emotion. We've all experienced sadness because of something happening in our lives. But if that sadness becomes persistent, lasts for more than 2 weeks, gets associated with other symptoms such as I mentioned, such as, you know, sleep, fatigue, concentration, appetite, I think that symptom complex becomes depression. But again, if you've seen that someone is persistently expressing sadness, seeking appropriate medical care would definitely be my medical advice.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Shahani, thank you so much for having this very important conversation with us.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Thank you, ma'am.
We appreciate it. Well, you know what? If you or someone you know has suicidal thoughts or in need of help, you can call 988. That's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Professionals are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Always there to help out. You are never alone. Please remember that.